Christ's appearances transformed his followers, and some previous skeptics, with his resurrection becoming the central focus of their teaching. So that's the story so far. So the foundation for the undisputed facts. Multiple independent early sources support the real facts. Even his enemies agree that in Christianity the facts are supported. That's why the enemies, that was the enemies we talked about, the historians around his time. Not the enemies he's got today who don't believe anything anyway, but these are the enemies that actually mention him as part of their historical documents. Embarrassing admissions support the facts, eyewitness testimony support the facts, and the early testimony support the facts. So basically, what we've got so far is Jesus lived, Jesus died, Jesus was resurrected, and all those whose lives he touched were different people because of the reality of the facts of their day. And if they have confidence in what they did when they lived at that time, we can have confidence in the same facts today. And that's the basis of that. So there's lots of different explanations. Despite the people accepting that the tomb was empty, there's a lot of people say lots of different things as to why the tomb was empty, or even the resurrection of Jesus, why it took place and what it didn't, and what happened. So let's have a look at some of the different arguments, because people will throw these things at you, and if you're not ready to catch them and throw them back, then they might catch you by surprise. That's one of the things I try to do with these lessons, okay? Like Frank, like myself, and like some others, we've heard a lot of the arguments many times over the years. And we've had to find answers for some of the arguments over the years. So when I teach like this, I try and take the opportunity to put in some of the questions that people have asked, and then supply the answers to those questions, so that when you get asked the same questions, which you will be, you at least have A, heard the question, and B, you'll be able to come up with an answer. Because there's nothing worse than somebody suddenly saying something in the blue, and you going, I don't know. But I mean, it happens, okay? I remember the first time that somebody ever asked me, where did Cain get his wife from? I thought, I don't know, I wasn't there at the time. But eventually I got to understand where Cain got his wife from. I was able to answer it. And that's the kind of thing we'll do here, alright? So, the resurrection hypothesis, with the philosophical appeal, the best explanation approach. It's also called the cumulative case or the abductive argumentation method. Now, memorize all those, because somebody sometime will actually use them to try and confuse you. And if I haven't confused you, then you'll be alright, alright? Universally accepted historical criteria. What was the best explanation? Some people say the power, some people say the scope of the situation he was up against. Some people, it wasn't just an ad hoc thing. God planned the whole situation that Christ would ultimately die for mankind. It didn't contradict accepted beliefs, because it was a problem with the people who held the beliefs that had problems. And it exceeds rival theories in meeting all those conditions. Okay? So history. Some people say, really, it's just a legend. It's a myth. Some people say it was a hallucination. They had a multiple hallucination that Jesus was risen. They were all, overwhelmed. Some people say the body was stolen. That's why the tomb was empty. Some people even go far and say they went to the wrong tomb. That's stupid. The one Jesus was buried in was just around the corner. They went to the wrong tomb. And some people say that Jesus, the resurrection, really is only a spiritual thing. It's something that we hang on to spiritually. It never really took place, but it's something that us Christians like to think about. So we add a spiritual dimension to things.
What about the swoons here as well?
Yeah. Oh, there was some. Sorry. Swoon. Yeah. Some people say Jesus on the cross, he swooned, and he didn't really die. So basically, when they took him back off the cross and started taking towards the tomb, he suddenly woke up.
The spirit inside.
Well, the spirit inside, yeah. Yes. That's the
Didn't
problem.
bother breaking his legs.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. If he had broken his legs, that wouldn't have happened, yeah.
Yeah.
And some people say, well, it could be, it's just an act of God. The resurrection is an act of God. So, legend. Some people say the early dating of the Gospels ensures they were written during the lifetime of the eyewitnesses who could actually say, if you just say this is a myth, this is just a story we invented, say we were there. Okay? And nearly all the scholars agree that the Gospels we have today are what was written in that first century. Now, you couldn't have said that 100 years ago, because many people 100 odd years ago argued that the Gospels weren't written until 200 or 300 years after Christ. As a matter of fact, if you watched QI about 3-4 months ago, on a slightly different subject, they were saying that the books we have in our Bible weren't in our Bible, weren't accepted books until the 3rd or 4th century when the Roman Catholic Church brought them all together. And it's funny that, because you can read lots of stuff about that, but it's wrong. Because as a matter of fact, even since this last 2 years, they discovered a piece of Matthew that they date to 75 AD. That's a piece of Matthew's Gospel. They've discovered, and for years, there's been in John Ryland's library, a piece of John's Gospel, and that's in the 1st century. And I believe just recently they've discovered another piece of parchment. And I'm not too, I think I've given that to somebody to verify the facts of that, because it sounds too good to be true. But the evidence they had seemed to be something bang on right in the time of Christ. When you think about it, you have the people who were there, you have the people who then were the first followers of Jesus, and the people who were taught by those who were the first followers of Jesus. So they'd heard all these arguments about Jesus not being a historical character, Jesus not being risen, Jesus just being a myth. They heard all these things, and in their day, they would say, that's not true, we were there. That's the end product, we were there. And the writings we have in our Gospels today are the eyewitnesses' accounts of those people who were there in the 1st century.
It's interesting that the book of Acts ends with Paul in his own hired house, teaching all who came to him. Now, if Paul had died, if Paul had been executed already, it would have been in Luke's record.
Yeah.
So that proves that since Paul was executed about AD 70, that must have been written before AD 70.
That's right.
Logical.
Yeah, so we have eyewitness stuff. And it's good stuff, because they actually were better eyewitnesses than we are. A lot of countries, we are civilized now, okay? We've got big libraries, we've got our computers, we've got our TVs, we've got all this stuff, feeding us information. If we forget something, or if it's a little bit of trivia, we don't bother remembering it. Because if we need it, we can go to the library, or we can go to Frank, or somebody like that, and they can help us out. But in those days, people had to use their memories a lot more than we have to use them today. In a lot of African traditions, a lot of the stories have been passed on from generation to generation. There were special people within the tribes who were given the job of making sure that nothing was lost. All the information was held on to. And so it was in these days. There were specialist people who were good at writing down what was the facts. And they were far better at it than we are today. So historians demonstrate that it takes at least one generation to pass for an event before a legend can enter and be a corrupt account. But if you're trying to say it's false within the lifetime of the people who were involved in it, they can turn around and say, that's wrong, you've got that wrong. Okay, they can deny the account. So events can be historically traced back to the disciples. The legend hypothesis cannot explain the historical validity of the transformation of the person like James. Didn't believe in him while Jesus was around. Saw the resurrected Christ, was involved in all the resurrection, and suddenly he's a leading man in the church because he's been converted. He understands it's a reality. Everything that Jesus said has come true. Apostle Paul, a dire enemy of the church, directly opposed. He was dragging Christians off. He was making sure they're carried off. And some of them, I'm almost convinced, he was involved in making sure they died. And suddenly, that Apostle Paul, from being such a vast enemy of the church, turns around and suddenly he's the one being beaten up. He's the one who's been chased. And he's the one who's been left for dead. A total transformation in life. He wouldn't have done that for a lie. He did it for something special. So the disciples went to their deaths for the truth, and not for any myth or any legend. The empty tomb is validated by non-Christian sources. Currently, the number one explanation used by skeptics is they all had a hallucination. But that doesn't explain the empty tomb. The body was still missing. Hallucinations are generally experienced by people wanting to see something. And those, I remember the last 3 days, the apostles, before Jesus showed himself to them, they were ready to go back fishing. They were ready to give up. The poor two guys on the road to Emmaus, walking along depressed. Oh, we're all going wrong. Dear. And Jesus goes along, don't even recognize in their depression and their grief of the last waste of the last 3 years of their lives, following this Jesus guy who was going to do everything. And they're just so depressed they couldn't even recognize him when he's walking along and talking to them. And then when they do recognize, wow, it's a transformation. They were going away from Jerusalem, and suddenly, let's get back and tell people we said we met him. He's risen. Wow! It's transformation, you know.
You've got an extra D on people, Graham.
What?
Have you seen it?
No. Oh, people.
Yes,
But it just shows, you know, it's a genuine article, this, you know. It's not rubbish. Sorry, I'll remember to take it out. Jewish belief only looked forward to the end time for the resurrection and not for the Messiah to be resurrected. Remember we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. The Jews were looking, they couldn't even understand Isaiah really, because Isaiah talked about a Messiah that was going to be victorious, but it also talked about a guy who was a suffering servant. And they thought, well, goodness, there must be two people. It must be talking about 2 different people. There's no way that can be talking about the same person. And that was their real problem when it came to understanding who Jesus was, because they wanted somebody to take on Rome. Victorious, the big white horse charging in there and taking on the Romans and beating them at their own game. And just, wow, it just totally just blew their minds. So they couldn't understand that Jesus would be hung up on a cross and become resurrected. It just didn't make sense to them. And skeptics would in no way be psychologically expecting to see Jesus return from the grave. The argument from, this is a good one, cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a theory that asserts it is psychologically uncomfortable to hold contradictory ideas. Okay? When you're familiar with something, when you're confident in something, then you have a certain attitude. But when somebody introduces something into the mix that suddenly takes you out of your comfort zone, that's what they talk about when they talk about cognitive dissonance. Suddenly you're not sure about things. Suddenly you're, do I go this way? Do I go that way? Do I accept this? Do I accept that? And the two things, basically, it's an either-or situation. You're either going to do that or you're going to do that, but you can't do both because it doesn't work.
And you don't want to consider it.
And you sometimes you don't even want to take it on. Yeah, you don't want to consider it at all. So this fails to explain the empty tomb and the appearances to skeptics. Okay, this idea that the disciples couldn't really live with the idea, and it was a reason why they wouldn't hallucinate and think, well, everything's okay. And again, for hallucination often, I mean, we're pretty good. We've got guys at the moment in our TV who can do a pretty good job of this fooling people. You know, we've got with Dynamo. You know, he does a pretty good job. We have people who can trick people, but they'll admit this is trickery. You know, they're not geniuses, and they've worked hard to get where they are, to be able to get to the point where they can do it. And you look at it and think, I can't understand how that happens. But this is, again, in Jesus' day, here was somebody who didn't just fool, according to them, fool 1 or 2 people. I mean, one time he met 500 people, and he was there. They knew he'd been resurrected. and it changed their lives, it transformed their lives. So Jesus didn't just appear to one or two, and you could say, they were hallucinating, they were deluded. Jesus would walk about, and he was seen by loads and loads of people. And they can't all be hallucinating at one time. So, not just individuals, but groups of individuals met the Christ and changed and transformed their lives. And they were prepared to die for what they now understood. Not just in one location, Jesus was all over the place. Multiple locations. Not just in one circumstance, multiple circumstances. Not just to believers, but also to unbelievers and skeptics and even enemies. Think of poor old Thomas. I don't believe. And then, wow. And he is so caught up with belief that he puts down and says, my Lord and my God. You know, how stupid am I? You really are here. And the beauty of Jesus, he said, I won't believe, Thomas said, I won't believe, look, fingers in his hands, you know, feel the holes. And Jesus says, okay. And Thomas just goes to his knees, my Lord and my God.
Mm-hmm.
There's no record of him ever putting his fingers in his hands. Okay? Because he didn't need to.
Paul didn't expect it either, did he?
No, Paul, but he was opposite. Yeah, who are you, Lord? So again, another delusion. Why would you have a delusion about something like that? When it actually was an unexpected place, when it was totally in mindset against anything happening like that, he brought me news about the same thing. Stolen body. That really can't. If they knew where the body was, are they going to die for a lie? And plus the enemies, if the body has been stolen, all you're going to do is show him, bring him out. Where is he?
Yeah.
You know, you can prove it. If you can prove it, and we're lying, do it. And they couldn't do it. No one dies for what they don't know. What they know is going to be false. Empty tomb on its own would not convince many, if any. New Testament records precautions the enemies took to prevent the possibility. They rolled a big stone over it, they sealed it with a Roman seal, and then they put a guard on it. Nobody's getting out of this tomb. And he did. First eyewitnesses thought the body was taken, other appearances later convinced them otherwise. Some people say. It's too easy for the religious supporters of Christ to say it just didn't happen. Just go to the right tomb and produce a body. They could have blown the whole thing out of the water, but they couldn't do that. They didn't do it. And Joseph's burial site, he was a rich man. It wouldn't have been that many tombs in the area, and such a big thing happening in front of a lot of people. People knew where Jesus was buried. And therefore, well, the first, you imagine somebody saying, well, I don't know where Jesus is buried. What's that bunch of Romans that suddenly appears out of nowhere and standing in front of that big stone doing? What are they guarding? I don't know. It wasn't done in private. They changed the guard every 4 hours. That means there are a bunch of soldiers go walking down the street into a cemetery, and they're planting themselves in front of a stone, and people are going to know, people are going to hear. So it's not a secret. It wasn't done in secret. And so they couldn't say, we don't know where the right tomb was.
They wouldn't make an example of Jesus. They wanted to make an example of Jesus.
Well, they were frightened. Somebody was frightened of what Jesus had said. Somebody had at least an inkling that he meant to come back from the dead. So they were making sure it wouldn't happen. They were going to keep him nailed down there. And so with all those precautions, and he still disappears in the tomb. So Jesus was scourged to the point where he was completely disfigured. I'm going to come back to that in the next weeks. But if any, how many of you seen that film by what do you call it? The Christ, the Passion of Christ.
Mm.
You seen that one? You seen the mess at the end there, and the mess that thing does to the human body. Just I mean, he was a mess after that. Death recorded in all 4 Gospels. Death viewed by close witnesses. Roman soldiers didn't allow their victims to live normally. and therefore he broke either side, broke the legs because they weren't dead yet, came to Christ and he was dead. So just make sure to stick a spear in the side and it comes out water and blood. When we ever get around to doing the life of Christ, I've got some nice stuff on the crucifixion and resurrection, and we'll look at the medical side of what happens when the water is separated from the blood and stuff like that.
And the Romans broke the legs of the others to make sure they were dead.
That's right. And it didn't, yeah. And Jesus was already dead, so they didn't need to do that.
Right.
Spear wound described by John, in the technical term, is the rupturing of the pericardium. All right? But it's an interesting concept. Jesus would have to revive in the tomb in that state. If you've seen the film, you know the state. And this stone is not just a little stone that's put in front of the door. This thing's huge. And he would have, in that state, from the inside of the tomb, where you can't really get your hands around it, out in the front, you'll be able to get your hands around the stone, because the stone's sealed in the tomb. And it's also got the Roman seal across it anyway. And he's supposed to have pushed that out of the way, and then he's got past the guards without the guards even knowing. And in his state, you know, crazy. Worship described by the disciples would have been unlikely if Jesus was crippled about and in greatly wounded state. He was seen in glorious form by Paul later on. Matter of fact, Peter says something similar. I mean, he says, "Where is Christ now? This Jesus whom you crucified, he's seated at the right hand of God." He's seated at the right hand in his glory. When you get to chapter 7 and Stephen's being stoned, he's no longer seated. He's standing up and seeing Stephen being stoned. He's identifying with the stoning of Stephen. Jesus cares. Jesus is involved, even from the throne of God. The Gospel accounts record the disciples disbelieving even on resurrection morning. It was the physical appearance of Christ that transformed them. He was there. Thomas, down in, touched Christ, took food, they ate in their presence. He did all that. James, he was converted by the physical encounter with Jesus. No mention in any historical document of a twin. Somebody said Jesus had a twin. You know, how far do you want to go? This is quite a document that's used by quite a lot of people. It's what they call an apocryphal gospel because it's full of rubbish. But a lot of people say, "Oh, look, see, that should be in the Bible. It's Gospel of Thomas." But actually, one of the reasons why it isn't in the Bible is it comes up with ideas of it like this. He would have had to mutilate himself to come, you know. If Jesus had a twin, that's okay when he was doing good things. But if he had a twin and somebody saw the resurrected Christ, the twin, would have had to have all the persecution scars. Would have had to have the nails in the hands. It had to be a twin that had been undergone quite a lot of damage to appear to be like the risen Christ. Because the real twin was in the grave, you know. Would have been suicide. Bottom line, absolutely no evidence for this theory whatsoever. Jesus predicted his death and resurrection multiple times in the presence of believers and skepticals. And the core facts of the resurrection presented in all the Gospel accounts were written during the lifetime of the eyewitnesses. We were there. Matter of fact, 1 John, I love 1 John. But the introduction, the first 4 verses of 1 John, that's one of the arguments that John makes. I remember there was a Welsh comedian, Max Boyce. And what he used to do when he used to go to places to do a stage show, he used to go there a couple of days early, and he would always try and get to the local football game or rugby game, depending on the time, what they did. And so he'd be there watching the local team play. And then when he got up to his act at night on the Saturday night, he would say, "Did you see what that guy did? Did you see what he did?" And the whole crowd behind him, the local crowd behind him, because he's talking about their local football hero. And he could say that because he was there. And John predated Max Boyce by 2,000 years. Basically, in his introduction to 1 John chapter 1 to 4, he turns around and says, "I was there. I was there." That's one of my, I can tell you about this because I was there. What a feeling that must have been for the guy when he's writing that letter. 1 John's a letter of love, but it's also a letter of confidence. He starts off in the middle of the chapter, about chapter 3, he says, you are children of God. You are the children of God. In chapter 5 he turns around and says, heaven is a reality for you. You have eternal life. A lot of people say, I'm a Christian, but I'm not sure if I'm going to heaven or not. John says, what are you talking about? He said, you're a child of God, you've got all the promises of God. Heaven is yours. It's a reality now. Unless you want to walk away. But if you hang on to what you've got and keep on the direction you're going, heaven is as real to you now as it will be in eternity. He says, I was there. I saw the risen Christ. And based on that risen Christ, I can say to you with confidence, if you're a child of God, you too will rise. Isn't that amazing? That's powerful, isn't it? And that's because he's an eyewitness. He's a man who ultimately, he's like the only man who dies peacefully, but all the rest die violently. But he spends time in prison. And he's spending time in prison because he doesn't believe in Jesus. He doesn't believe in the rest. Of course not. He's spending time in prison because he believes that Christ is risen. There's nothing you can do to me. Put me in prison if you like. Kill me if you like. I don't care. I'm going home. Amazing stuff. So, you know, the evidence is there. And I was there. That's beautiful stuff. The proposal that Jesus was bodily raised from the dead possesses unrivaled power to explain the historical data at the heart of early Christianity. What changed these people? What transformed these people? What motivated these people? You know, there are religions out there who will tell you, you come to Christ and it'll be like a bed of roses. All your problems will be taken care of. You'll never have another problem as long as you live. They're liars. And all you need to do is look at the Apostle Paul. He talks more about the grace of God and the love of God than anybody. And you look at the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Beaten, left for dead, shipwrecked. Come and join us, pal. This is a great idea. Dragged out, stoned, no end of times. All for the sake of a dead Christ? No. For the sake of a living Christ.
Lord Lyttelton set out to prove the story of Paul's conversion was a fable. He ended up by writing his faith in the truth of the story.
Right? And that's happened time and time
again.
In history, even the last 150 years, we've had people who have actually set out to the Holy Land, the Palestinian areas, actually to say, I don't believe these things happen. I don't believe that these places that they're talking about here existed. I don't believe this, that, next thing about Christ. And after 2 years or 3 years of actually hard graft and gathering all the evidence and digging up all the different bits and pieces, they end up writing.
So William Ramsey spent 20 years doing it. And ended up by writing Paul the Apostle and the Epistles of Paul.
There you are. I know Ramsey was a good guy. Went out to attack Christianity, became a Christian, and started stout Christianity. So, the power of the resurrection to change people's lives is just as real today as it was back then. If we believe what these guys are saying now, which were preaching back then and transformed people's lives back then, the same Christ is the same one that we believe in. The same death, burial, resurrection that transformed their lives can transform our lives if we put our trust in it. The same promises that were given to these people when they became Christians in order to live their lives to God's glory and ultimately go home to glory are the same message that transforms and touches our lives today. And if we'll believe in it, if we'll trust in it, it can make a huge difference in our lives. And it's all there, really. It's all in the book, you know.
Yes.
The primary reason that people reject this option rejected by critics is because of their anti-supernatural bias. They're true like God, and it's an interesting phrase to read lots of books, in an a priori manner. They've already made up their minds. There's lots of people, a guy called Hume, He's famous because in a number of his books he attacks Christianity. He doesn't believe in the virgin birth, he doesn't believe in the miracles Jesus did. When you really question a thing, he doesn't believe in God, and he doesn't believe in the miracles of creation of God, by God. The same God who can create a universe can create a virgin birth, can raise somebody from the dead, can allow miracles to happen in the life and through the lives of Jesus Christ. If you admit that Christ is capable of doing miracles, then why stop there? Go the whole hog, accept all that God can do in the miraculous realm. But because people say, in fact, when you was around, it's only about the last 50 years or so. One of the big arguments that you and I would have faced time after time after time with people who said, if I can't see it, I won't believe it. If I can't see it, I won't believe it. Now, there's only really stupid people that use that argument today. Because we've got electron microscopes that can show you stuff. Oh, look at this table. That table's solid, isn't it? Look at Frank's stick. Listen to this. Is that solid or not?
It's solid.
It's solid.
Yeah.
But if you look at it through an electron microscope, it's full of holes.
Moving.
It's full of whole things alive, it's moving. With electrons. Right? Can you believe your eyes? Can you believe your eyes? Can you really believe your eyes?
I know I have a brain, but I've never seen it.
Well, that's the classic argument, isn't it? Somebody says to me, I only believe what I can see. And that's, Frank can say that because he had a scan quite recently. He knows he's got a brain. Alright? It's maybe not working well. No, he knows he's got a brain. But the reality is most of us have never seen our brains.
Yeah.
And yet the very fact that we can do things and speak and see and all that, we know, we can see the results of the brain. And that's what we're challenging people to do. People say, I can't see God. Yeah, you may not be able to see God, but the reality is God exists, whether you believe in Him or not. Bernard was a carpenter, brilliant carpenter. If you ever get around his house, he'll do a tour and show you all the stuff he's made with his hands. His whole house is filled with his own furniture. Beautiful stuff. This building, I don't know who built it. Matter of fact, built better Mike, he met the guy who built this. But I don't know who built it. But I know somebody built it. And that's all we're asking people to do. The evidence is we exist, the building exists, somebody made it. And we challenge people to do that. And the same with the resurrected too. We have confidence in God because He's demonstrated His faithfulness. And we can trust all that He promised and did through Jesus Christ. Psychological, miracle in three ways. Psychological, the disciples and others imagined the risen Christ, changed from an unbelieving cowards into courageous evangelists. They went to their deaths for being deceived or trusting in something that they knew. Okay, that's a psychological argument. Were they nuts? Were they psychologically overwhelmed? Would they really do that if they didn't believe?
But there's a lot of things we cannot see. If we cannot believe there is God, because we can't see God.
That's right.
Brother, can you show us your mind?
That's right.
So
You can see the outworkings of the mind.
So if you can't show me your mind, that means you don't have
Why,
mind.
that's right. There's the same similar argument with the we talked about a couple of weeks ago about the Godhead, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and somebody says, explain that to me. Basically, you struggle. But if you can get them to explain to you how the Bible talks about us being human, and it says we are body, soul, and spirit. Well, I can see my body. But they've been, Japanese actually have got they've been using special cameras and weight machines and looking at bodies of people who are dying to see how much a soul weighs. And they haven't seen one yet, okay? But the Bible says we have a soul. That is us, the real us. We're not just a body, that's a vehicle. That's something we use for our purpose here on earth. But the real you is not just stuck in there. If you lose your arm or your leg, are you any less a person? Are you any less of a soul? Yeah, I've lost one. Matter of fact, it's interesting, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they actually talk about the blood being precious. And blood being part, they link that with the soul, the blood being part of the soul. Does that mean to say if you have a nosebleed, you lose part of your soul? Anyway, that's a different
You say that the body plus the blood is the soul.
Yes. So anyway, I shouldn't say that. The reality, body, soul, and spirit. The spirit, the Ecclesiastes says, the spirit goes back to God from whence it came. The spirit is that which is in man that recognizes spiritual things. Some people used to say there's a God-shaped void in every individual. There's something there that says there's got to be something. There's got to be more than this. And whoever that is, that's God. Okay? Our understanding in Christ, God has revealed himself. So we're more than just a body.
Absent from the body,
At home with the Lord.
That's right.
That's right.
Looking forward.
Body in the grave.
Yeah.
How many? I've got a neighbour. Every day since his wife died, she's been dead by about 3 years. He walks up to the graveyard and spends some time with her because he thinks she's still there.
Yeah.
For Christians who die, the family don't have that same regard for the old body.
Yeah.
Because the body is gone.
No.
It's God will take care of that some other time. The person is gone.
Your body goes every 7 years anyway, doesn't it?
Well, you get a new body. Apparently,
That's the tent.
I'm not the man I used
that's
to
the
be.
tent. That's right. The only thing, this is supposedly debatable, the only thing that hasn't changed, or doesn't change, is the cochlea of your ear. Apparently it stays the same. Though I have heard somebody say even it changes, but most of the stuff I've read says that doesn't change. I don't know. But anyway, that's interesting. So you've got psychological, you've got the biological. Jesus survived the beatings, the scourging, the cross, the spear through the heart. He fooled his executioners. He recuperated the tool, felt a lot better after 3 days. He rolled away the stone and had his resurrection falsely proclaimed.
When we darken the tomb as well, so
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
And when he opened up the door, he saw the light.
Yeah.
Okay.
He let his clothes in the tomb too.
Absolutely, when naked. Okay. Theological. Christ's resurrection was a true, historical, valid, and divine miracle. Jesus died and came back to life 3 days later, which is in keeping with the theme of everything that was said in the Gospels. He already risen. Lazarus was already risen from the dead, and if he can do that, surely God can raise Christ from the dead. In fact, then Paul goes on, for example, in his in his letter to the Romans, and that's one of the first things he says in the first 4 verses. He says that the truth, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead, lives in us. Jesus, the Holy Spirit's power to raise Christ from the dead impacts us. He says it is a demonstration of the reality of everything that Jesus said. When Jesus died on the cross, he died on the cross with 2 others. What makes the difference? What makes Jesus so different from the others? 3 days later, the resurrection. The other 2 weren't raised. Jesus was raised. And Paul, writing in Romans 10, says it is the power that demonstrates the truth of who Jesus is, that he was able to break the bonds of death and have his resurrection. Okay? So we'll hold it there. Okay. But